Good morning. Try it again. All right. Good morning. Welcome to this virtual and in-person service in the Idaho Falls Unitarian Universalist Church on this 29th day of May 2022. I'm Ron Goen, and I will be assisting Victoria McDonald this morning in the service. And if you are watching online, and I hope a lot of people are watching online because there are so few people here this morning, please sign on to the chat box so we can know who is attending. And also, please indicate any joys or concerns in the chat box so that we can read those a little later on. And also, for the people here, please write your joys or concerns on the slip of paper in the back of the room, and we will read those later. One other announcement: this service is being recorded, and so if you happen to be in the range of the camera, you will also be recorded here. So just a little heads up about that. And finally, this church is self-supporting, so all donations are greatly appreciated. There's a basket by the back door for donations, and donations can be made online on the website at IdahoFallsUU.org. Just click on the Give button in the upper right-hand corner. Donations can also be mailed into UUCIF, Post Office Box 50376, Idaho Falls, Idaho 83405. Any donations are gratefully received. And now we will prepare ourselves for worship by ringing the peace bowl. We'll calm our hearts, our minds, our breathing. And I will ring the peace bowl 3 times. Now we'll have the prelude. church's covenant helps us remember why we are a part of this faith and why we give our time and our resources to this congregation. If you so choose, please recite along with me the covenant that this congregation has chosen to live by. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now light the chalice with the words from Albert Schweitzer. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us.
Okay, okay. No, okay. This morning I start my reading with a blessing for life and the end of life by Natalie Fenimore from the Unitarian Universalist Associate webpage. We offer blessings for life and the end of life. Blessings for the dying, blessings for the caregiver, holding love and carrying burden. Blessed is the body, youth claimed by death, elder claimed by death. Blessed is all creation moving toward one ending in order to begin again. Blessed is the black for mourning. Blessed is the white worn for mourning. Blessed is the body wrapped for grieving. Blessed is the showing of pain. Blessing is the celebration of life. Bless the ashes, bless the dust, bless the grave. Blessed are the memories. Bless those who feel hurt and hate, anger and sorrow, fear and confusion, compassion and love. Blessings to our knowings of death. May all be blessed, may all be held. Blessings on life's journey. Amen.
Lives from rulers
Okay, that side. Okay. So, I'm starting out, there's no time for all ages this morning, but I am going to introduce the state of Alaska. Because a picture's worth 1,000 words, but a map is worth 10,000 words. I have my little pointer stick. I'm going to have to talk loud because I won't have a microphone, but I can talk loudly. Alaska's the 49th state. You know, Texas used to be very proud of being the biggest state. But if we were to cut Alaska in half, Texas would be the 3rd largest state. Don't tell that to a Texan. They won't take it kindly. So when I moved to Alaska, I came up from Seattle on a ferry, and this is all the money we had. So we rode up here, stopped in Ketchikan, made it to Wrangell, anyway, a lot. So this is the banana belt of Alaska. And it's where all the rain falls, 13 to 14 feet a year, honestly. However, the Aleutians, okay, so here's the mainland of Alaska. I'll talk about that. That's where it gets cold. This gets some cold, but nothing like the interior. So if you go out onto, this is the Alaska Peninsula right here, and the Aleutians go all the way almost to Russia. So they extend here, they start here, and then on this map, this is a continuation where they go, and they would arc across here. And right underneath the Aleutians is a trench that brings up an upwelling with phenomenal amounts of life. What else can I tell you about the Aleutians? They have captivated me ever since I went. And when I first went to Alaska, all I read were books about the Aleutians, and I had no idea how far away they are. They are not only far away in distance, they're far away in time. So I think I'm going to stop there because I have a whole lot of other stuff to say about the Aleutians.
Mic is still on. It's time for our joys and concerns. We don't have any joys or concerns written down.
Somebody did. No? Okay.
No. Well, I have a joy. Oh, we have some in the chat box.
We do. David Bogart says, David is grateful for having the opportunity to spend a wonderful weekend with friends in art and nature, conversation, and sharing. Cool.
Very good. I have a joy. I got to watch my granddaughter in Taiwan's graduation ceremony yesterday morning, which was actually their Saturday night, I guess. And it was a beautiful ceremony. And also I'd like to share a concern that I think we all have, that for the people down in Texas, the tragedy that occurs down there. And I guess there's no more to say about that. Are there any other joys or concerns? Yes?
Our daughter will finish her first year of first grade this next week. Good.
Well, congratulations. Congratulations. So we'll light one more candle for those joys and concerns that are left unspoken in our hearts. And so, okay.
This reading is from Howard Thurman, who is a remarkable man, who's no longer with us, but his words remain. It's called Sing Your Own Song. Sing your own song, said the river. Sing your own song. Out of yesterday's song, it comes and it goes into tomorrow. Sing your own song. With your life, fashion, beauty. This too is a song. Riches will pass and power, but beauty remains. Sing your own song. All that is worth doing, do well, said the river. Sing your own song. Certain and round be the measure, every line be graceful and true. Time is the mold, time is the weaver, because time and the workman are together. Sing your own song, sing well, said the river, sing well. I have to keep looking at the program to remind me where I am. My talk today is about a young Aleut or Unangan boy, Nick Golodoff. The book Atu Boy by Nick Golodoff was my primary reference, backed by the book Aleuts, Survivors of the Bering Land Bridge. Nick was captured in his village on Attu Island, September 1942, and taken to Japan. There he stayed in a camp with his family and the other Aleuts. I was captivated by his story because of his modesty in telling his experiences as a prisoner of war and describing without bitterness his return to the Aleutians in 1945 at the end of World War II. Until his death in 2013, Nick lived a subsistence life using hunting rifles, metal boats, outboards, and the benefits of civilization. And now the Aleutians are recognized as crucial to international fishing and transit through the Arctic Ocean. And one never knows, but Nick might have seen Russia from his porch. Nick was born in 1935 on a small, unnamed island 30 miles south of Attu. So this is Attu. It's the westernmost island in the entire Aleutians. His parents, Lawrence Golodoff and mother Olean Horisov Golodoff, were trapping foxes, hunting sea otters, and fur seals to earn money. They lived in an underground sod house called a barabara, roofed with whalebone, wood, and plant matting. They entered the barabara through a hole in the roof, but the Russians, who arrived after 1741, brought cows. The cows grazed on the land and the roofs of the underground houses, breaking through those roofs and ruining many homes. But by the 1800s, at the latest, side doors were used to enter the barabaras. They maintained living in those barabaras for many years after that, until finally what I would call white man's housing came in. It's hard to imagine surviving those conditions, but for the Aleuts, who thrived for thousands of years, depending on resources from the Pacific Ocean to the south and the Bering Sea on the north, it was home. Villagers still rely on the incredible, productive ocean waters, but they now have access to the modern world. Nick's mother was trapping and caring for 6 other children during her pregnancy. After Nick's birth, his family moved to Attu to be closer to his mother's village. And to quote Nick, in 1942, before the war began for us, Attu was a nice, quiet place with a population of about 42 people. We had nothing, no insulation in the houses, no inside plumbing. There were wood stoves to heat our houses. Attu was plain and quiet all the time. And of course, the villagers burned wood brought in by sea currents, since trees do not grow on many of the windswept islands. However, Attu had a well-built BIA school with a white teacher and her husband who maintained radio contact with the outside world. Aleutian lives were regulated by hunting and trapping in the wintertime and summer fishing for salmon, halibut, cod, then drying and smoking the fish to hold for their subsistence winter food. U.S. Coast Guard cutters occasionally delivered mail and supplies and provided once yearly medical and dental assistance. And of course, the Onongan needed money to buy fabric, ammunition, and store food. So Aleut women wove incredible baskets using the fine grass growing on the islands and sold these baskets to outsiders and Coast Guardsmen. I've seen one Aleut basket in the Ketchikan Museum, but of course I wasn't allowed to touch it. The grass was so fine it resembled thick thread. When trapping season ended in late winter, the men pooled their furs to be sold and divided the cash among all residents, including widows, orphans, and those unable to earn money. Aleuts utilized animal skins, guts, feathers, bird beaks for clothing. Rainproof jackets, pants, and parkas were sewn from the gut linings of seals, carefully stitched by the women with waterproof seams. If you want to see them, go to Pinterest, and they have photos of this incredible clothing. Knee-high moccasins were sewn using the heavier walrus or sea lion skins and stuffed with grass for warmth. The glare of sun on the water when you're out in a kayak all day, it is very bright. And that can blind a human. So wrap-around wooden sun shields were created, leaving small slits to protect the eyes. Protective wooden hats were carved with long, long bills, again to protect your eyes, extending over the face. And of course, all items were beautifully decorated with paint or feathers. And if you Google Aleut bentwood hats or Aleut eyewear, you will find pictures of these items. Life in the Aleutians was difficult. Villagers always kept a constant watch for nasty weather because men went out hunting sea lions, seals, whales in the open ocean inside their kayaks. Kayaks were actually termed bidarkas by them, and they were made from sea lion hide, stretched over wooden slats. They were lightweight, waterproof, but not impervious to rough weather, and many men were lost in the storms and tidal currents that swirl past the islands. Young boys were expected to be hunters, and as young children they sat on a box with their legs held straight out in front of them, propping their feet on an opposite box. Adults in a ceremonial system gently pushed their knees down, stretching their tendons, ligaments, and muscles, so they were able to sit in a kayak for hours and not have leg cramps. Also, boys' shoulders were gently twisted, so they lifted their arms up and then twisted them back. And that gave them greater flexibility so they could accurately throw their atlatls, spears, bows and arrows, and they became very, very good hunters. Where am I? Okay. Traditionally, bows and arrows were used plus atlatls with spears, their primary weapons. But when the natives saw the Russian guns, they recognized their power and eagerly traded for them, but the Russians were very careful not to sell too many. When the Russian sea otter hunters discovered that the Chinese, the wealthy Chinese, were willing to pay very high prices for sea otter skins that have more insulating hair than any other sea mammal, they were mercilessly hunted on the Kamchatka Peninsula, which comes down from eastern Russia. It's a very long peninsula. Searching for more sea otter, the Promaleshenki, which were the sea otter hunters, rather a rowdy bunch, headed west onto the chain of islands that they found to be inhabited by skillful hunters. The Aleuts were absolutely one with their kayaks and able to accurately spear animals from a rocking boats. And the Russians commandeered them to hunt. The Russians brutally enslaved the adult men, forcing them to leave their villages and not allowing them onto their ships during stormy weather. The men perished, and the Russians continually forced younger and younger men to hunt, finally using 15-year-old boys. When Russian Orthodox priests arrived, they slowed the brutality, and the Aleuts remained devoted adherents to the Russian Orthodox Church, and I'm sure it's because they felt they were saved. Russia faced enormous difficulties in maintaining control in Alaska, but financial stability caused by wars forced them to sell land that they had stolen. England and France wanted to buy the land, but when William Henry Seward offered them $7.2 million, the U.S. gained a massive amount of land that I believe was 25 cents an acre. I used to know this when I was a tour guide. The Russian occupation had been particularly severe for the Aleuts. Other tribes in Alaska only require 25% proven tribal bloodlines, but the Aleuts only require 10%, since so many perished during the Russian occupation. Moving into pre-World War II, Japanese fishing vessels were seen in the Aleutians in the 30s and 40s, and occasionally native men were killed on the islands as they ran their trap lines. Unknown people were seen, and stories about boogeymen spread, but nobody knew exactly what was happening. And later, of course, it was discovered that the Japanese had been mapping the islands in preparation for landing. The Unangan heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941, but the war seemed far away until June 3rd, 1942, when the Japanese bombed Dutch Harbor in Unalaska Bay. And I'd read and heard about Unalaska since I arrived in Alaska in 1974, but I never could figure out the reason for that name. In 2019, two friends and I rode the Alaska Marine Ferry, the Tustamina, from Kodiak to Dutch Harbor, and we call it Dutch. Most of the passengers on that sturdy little ferry were tourists like we were, but after a 3-day journey, we stopped for a few fascinating days in Dutch, sightseeing and breathing that incredibly clean air. One lovely afternoon, about 10 of us tourists walked over the hill to the village of Unalaska, heading towards the tall spire of the Russian Orthodox Church. We wandered the grounds, looking at gravestones, observing how the church was constructed and that it needed serious painting and maintenance. As we stood outside, a Russian Orthodox priest, followed by 2 little girls, came over to greet us and asked if we wanted to see the interior. Russian Orthodox priests are a common sight in western Alaska, wearing long black robes with a crucifix hanging from a rope belt. And their priests can marry, so it was normal to see them with children. We all said yes and followed him into the beautifully decorated church with icons and religious artifacts. He asked that we not take pictures, and we didn't. This gentle 35-year-old priest relayed the history of the church from its original building about 50 years before World War II, how it survived, and parishioners oiling their icons, their precious icons, and stashing them beneath the floor so they would be safe. And of course, he talked about its current status. Then he asked if we had questions. And one woman asked why the name Unalaska was used, since it just sounded negative. He replied that Unalaska meant Little Alaska, and he answered a question I had wondered about for 45 years. We admired the lovely building and left donations and thanks as he locked the door behind us. But back to Nick Golodoff. On June 7th, 1942, after church services finished in his village, the machine gun fire was heard. All the villagers were told to go to the school and later to their own houses, where each was guarded by a Japanese soldier. Nick was able to wander the paths. He was just a 7-year-old boy, and he found the Japanese soldiers to be friendly. However, the white school teacher and her husband were killed as he attempted to send a warning signal to the outside world. The soldiers occupied Attu for 3 months, and life became difficult since the villagers were not allowed to hunt or fish during the summer and had to share their stored fish with the Japanese. The Aleutian Islands are never too cold, nor are they too warm because of the constant ocean winds. But the lack of firewood that they would gather from the beaches meant villagers could not cook much or warm their chilly homes. Finally, the soldiers took the villagers to a large Japanese ship where they remained in the cargo hold until they reached Tokyo a week later, then on to Hokkaido and Sapporo. All the families stayed in one large Japanese house for 3 years and were not allowed to leave until the food almost ran out. There was no inside plumbing, so they used 2 planks under a building for an outhouse, so you'll have to use your imagination. There was no sink for hand washing, and Nick reported they wiped their hands on wet cloths, but many of them became ill without proper sanitation. At first, the Aleuts ate rice, oats, and fish, but later there was little food, even for the Japanese. Nick's father died as a prisoner of war when Nick was 8, along with 3 of his siblings, plus many other Unongan, many of whom had already been plagued with tuberculosis and malnutrition. The book Attu Boy was compiled when Nick was an old man, so his memories were vague. But he remembers his mother had a job digging clay as she left camp daily, so Nick walked back and forth with him, and soon he was wearing wooden slippers like the Japanese, since his shoes were worn out. During the last year Nick was in Japan, the Aleuts were allowed to leave their houses to find food for themselves. Health was always a concern. Some of them died if they only scratched themselves and their wounds because their wounds became easily infected. But at night, the young boys stole carrots, potatoes, and turnips from the Japanese garden. Everyone was always hungry, he reported. Of course, neither the Japanese nor the Aleuts understood one another, but Nick listened to Japanese, and after a while, he said he picked up a few words. The Unongan were told that the U.S. was losing the war, and they had no radio contact. However, Nick reported again that the Japanese were kind. They also were caught in a conflict in which they were pawns. Of the 42 villages taken to Sapporo, 24 left when the war ended. Excuse me. After the war, villagers were flown to Okinawa, then to Manila in the Philippines. American planes dropped drums of food for the starving people while they were in the Philippines. After a short time, all of them were shipped to San Francisco, where Nick was housed with the men, where he ate ice cream and became ill with an undiagnosed disease. After healing, Nick rejoined his mother and remaining siblings in a San Francisco hotel, then traveled to Seattle by train. The people stayed in Seattle for a month, then returned to Adak, far out on the Aleutian chain, where it was, as he said, cold, and he didn't like it. But another tragedy for the Unongan or the Aleuts, they're interchangeable, in 1942 was in villages closer to the mainland. U.S. Navy ships came to evacuate the natives, and closer to the mainland is this area right here, the Alaska Peninsula that's still connected to Alaska. So they came to evacuate the natives, not knowing what was going on. People were told to pack their belongings in one suitcase and were hurried onto the military ships. It was June and somewhat warm, and people had no idea how long they'd be gone or where they were going. But even more drastically, the military had no orders either. The people climbed aboard in summer clothes with their one suitcase. And of course, the military was mainly concerned with war in the South Pacific, and lacking ideas where to leave the natives, decided unused cannery buildings in southeast Alaska, down in the banana belt where they really don't have bananas, but it's warmer, they would provide homes for the Unongan. When I began commercial fishing in 1976, we'd stop in the protected bays in Chatham Strait and Hawk Inlet, where rotting cannery buildings remained. The docks had rotted, so we anchored away from the shore and waded onto rocky beaches, heading into the cannery buildings. They were enormous, two-story structures built from long, clear, dug fir boards. There was no insulation in the open rooms with high ceilings. The mess halls and cooking areas filled the first floor. On the second floor, dorms were filled with rusty twin spring mattresses. Outhouses were perched on the ends of piers. Tides kept the beaches clean. The encroaching forest was lovely to me, but threatening to the Aleuts, who were not accustomed to all these big trees, since only low bushes and scrubby trees survive in the Aleutians. The Aleuts were abandoned in the dripping rainforest, very, very different from their islands scoured by beach winds. But closer to Ketchikan, they were dropped off at an abandoned cannery in Ward Cove. Local tribes, Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian, reported, quote, they died like flies, unquote, from tuberculosis and diseases caused by neglect and hunger. Our natives felt pity for those natives they had never encountered, and who had been torn from their homes wearing summer clothes, and they helped them, offering oiled rain gear, warm clothes, and subsistence food, and giving them rides into town to pick up government rations. After the war, the Aleuts that survived were allowed to return to their homes, now radically altered. The Unongan and the Aleuts were not able to reoccupy their original villages. The islands that had not been occupied by the Japanese were ruined homes, pictures torn off walls, burned furniture, wood stoves dismantled, all done by American soldiers. Perhaps the soldiers, no, certainly the soldiers were angry that they sat out the war. And they may have been they were very unhappy with their forced isolation. I've heard stories from my mother how the U.S. servicemen hated being the Aleutians. As always, there are two sides to this story. But once the natives were in Atka, they built homes with leftover military lumber. The U.S. had left wide metal strips, one of the miracles of the war, for building airstrips on tundra that does not support concrete or asphalt. They also were left a large plane hangar, a cold storage, a big mess hall, and long Quonset huts. From there, the natives gradually rebuilt their villages. So why did I choose this story, Atu Boy, to bring to you? First, Nick Golodoff's story is out of print, and it was lucky that I found it. It's not about a famous Russian or an Alaskan, but about a common man who witnessed an unusual time in history. He was brave and honest, never bragged about what he endured, and lived in the Aleutians. He was a survivor and did not dwell on his hardships. In addition, the Aleuts and the Aleutians have captivated my imagination since I stepped into Southeast Alaska in October of '76. My mother, like many who lived during World War II, always worried that I'd hire on a teacher in that amazing isolated stepping stone of an archipelago leading Russians into Alaska. She had heard horror stories about our men, our U.S. soldiers, going crazy in the isolation, and she wanted to protect me. I never did apply, but I always noticed openings for teachers every summer and fall. But my short journey to Dutch Harbor, and this is a relic from the Unalaska Museum, gave me a glimpse of another jewel in this state and to me. Nick's perseverance and courage makes him a deserving hero. The closing words are again from Howard Thurman. Give me the courage to live, really live, not merely exist. Live dangerously, scorning risk. Live honestly, daring the truth, particularly the truth of myself. Live resiliently, ever changing, ever growing, ever adapting, enduring the pain of change, as though 'twere the travail of birth. Give me the courage to live, give me the strength to be free and endure the burden of freedom and the loneliness of those without chains. Let me not be trapped by success, nor by failure, nor pleasure, nor grief, nor malice, nor praise, nor remorse. Give me the courage to go on, facing all the trails, all that waits on the trail, going eagerly, joyously on, and paving my way as I go, without anger or fear or regret, taking what life gives, spending myself to the full, head high, spirit winged, like a god or goddess. On, till the shadows draw close. Then even when darkness shuts down and I go out alone as I came, naked and blind as I came, even then, gracious God, hear my prayer. Give me the courage to live.
We will now extinguish the chalice. Please join me in reading the words for the extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.